Okay, welcome to Direct and Indirect Cost Principle. I'm Dr. Gin. According to Lali, I'm Dr. Gin. My name is Louis Gin in reality. And today we're going to look at the famous university cost allocation plan. It's a high-level course or workshop. So we're going to go through a lot of interesting and juicy subjects, sometimes controversial. Agenda, look at the agenda. We have four topics. Cost allocation framework. We're going to look at the federal cost principles, then how pervasive indirect cost is, sometimes we call overhead cost, and then finally we will look at the intricacies of the cost allocation plan of the university. And this chart took me a long time to do it, but it encapsulates the whole thing. You start with the big framework called the missions, and then you funnel through the process and end up with the cost allocation plan of the university. Okay, so everything is linked. And so in order to understand CAB, you have to understand, the mission of the university, why we are here, and what we do in our daily work, and how it implies into the final cost allocation plan of the university. So the mission gives you the framework. That's the reason, the reason we are here at the university. We are primarily an academic institution. Not only that, we are a public academic institution. So we are, we are an agency of the state of California. So the mission defines what we are, what we want to do. It has no limit. When we look at mission, is wide open. We want to be here. We want to become excellent in our profession. Provide lots of resources, and encourage students to become, productive in our society, be leaders, be CEOs, be, whatever we plan the students to become when they grow up on campus. The problem with mission is that it's unlimited. You want to implement the mission, you can have uncountable number of resources, and you will probably not fulfill what you plan. And that's the reason when you're confronted with limited resources, you develop what we call the strategic plan. The strategic plan really limits, your goals and visions into something that is doable. Okay? That's what the university has spent a great deal of time developing the strategic plan, not only for this year, but it's usually a 5-year plan looking at into the future also. When you have a strategic plan, the first thing that you have to do is what you want to accomplish. And this is what we call goals. We have to establish certain goals in the academic areas and researching in many, many fields. However, to accomplish goals, there are many ways to do it. You want to go to the summit, when you're hiking, you can take many trails, and the particular trails that you choose become the objective. It's the tactical way of accomplishing something. And the most important thing when you're developing goals and objectives is that you have to confront with how much resources you have, funding. So resources encompasses everything. You have money, you have people, staff, faculty, staff, and physical plan. But in terms of developing your strategic plan, you already have that. And then is how much money do we have? And that's where we have the funding process. And at this moment, we are confronted with some funding shortfalls. And so we have to deal with that reality when we develop, our goals and objectives. Once we have that, during the process, there's a team that the president meets called the cabinets, and everybody participates. All the VPs participate in developing goals and objectives and confronting with the limited resources that we have that come from tuition income and also the funding from the state. Once we have that, then departments develop budgets. The budgets, again, takes time to develop the budget in the department, and the department is consolidated into the VP's department, and finally is integrated into the university department. Once we have the budget, then the fiscal year start. We spend activities, and that creates expenditures, and accounting captures all the expenditures and revenues, and then this whole set of information is captured in a data warehouse. And that's what we start looking at, what is being logged into the data warehouse. And when we have that, we wait until the end of the fiscal year, and then we start thinking about, we download the data from the data warehouse, and develop the cost allocation modeling, to different perspectives. And we look at both the university operating fund, and also we look at the auxiliaries, like parking operations, housing, which is self-support, and then we have the auxiliary, the associate, the ASC, the ASI type of organizations. We look at all those things and then develop the cost allocation model. And that process takes a few months. And the most important thing about the cost allocation process is to distinguish between what is direct cost and what is indirect cost. And then what is the MTDC allocation base? MTDC means modified total direct cost, which means there is the direct cost minus capital items that you remove from the allocation process. Interest expenses, for example, or funding for deferred maintenance, things like that. And then we look at peripherally, what is variable cost, and this is more important in manufacturing, but sometimes it's useful to look at variable costs. For example, one example would be how you ask yourself, what is the cost, as an exercise, what would be the cost of having a particular unit of a course. If a course is 1 unit or 2 units or 3 units per semester, how much does it cost to develop that? And so you have fixed cost, that is the faculty salaries and benefits, and then you divide by the number of the units. The more you increase, the lower the cost, and that becomes a variable, as an example. And then there are many other costs. I listed here below. They have historical cost, which when you look at whether they will have several years, you can build a history of those costs. And then projected cost means that when you're building a building, let's say a new housing for students, you have to project, both the revenues based on the rents, and also at the cost of maintaining the building and the cost of financing that building. So that's what you have projected cost. Replacement cost is mostly for when you want to replace capital. You buy, let's say, a computer that lasts 5 years, and then you have to look at, what happened after that. Is it going to be double the price, or is it going to be, a different technology, things like that? You have to look at those in those terms when you look at your long-term projections. Standard cost is something very useful. It's when you have several costs that varies from item to item, so you develop a sort of average cost. For example, in fringe benefits, there are many fringe benefit costs for each person. You have the health insurance cost, the dental insurance, retirement plans, and so on and so forth. So each person, you calculate each person will have a different rate. The rate means you divide the cost for a person, the actual fringe benefit divided by the salary base, and that's a rate. Okay, so you will have multiple, rates. You are a faculty member that have higher salary, your rate will be lower. But you have a person, let's say a janitor, whose salary is a lot lower than a faculty. But you have the same health insurance. Then when you calculate that rate will be maybe 50% or 60%. For a faculty, maybe just 35%. Things like that. You look at the president who has the highest salary, will be a lot lower. So the reason that we use standard cost is to simplify the process. This is when you're budgeting, you're planning how much does it cost. Instead of doing person by person, you develop an overall average. That average is called the standard fringe benefit rate. At the university, I think it's around 45% or something like that. Each campus have a different rate, depending on the distribution of salaries. Okay. Imputed cost means that when you have something that you have no data, okay, especially in manufacturing, when you have, let's say, the Pentagon ordered a new plane, and different plane that has different technology, and you have no data, you have only old data. So you have to really guess what it will be. That's what it called. You impute things based on your knowledge at the present time. Mm-hmm. And it's very useful because companies like Lockheed Martin, when they want to bid on the process of a new plane, they have to guess and submit that to the Pentagon, and they have to approve. And there are many companies, and so that's a very important exercise. It involves a lot of mathematical projections, engineering, planning, something. Common or shared costs, that's a very thing that we do to save, to gain economy of scale. Let's suppose that, each office, they use bond paper. We all can go to Walmart and buy bond paper of our own, but it doesn't make sense because we can buy in bulk. So we have, the purchasing office buy a huge amount of bond paper, and then we get a huge discount by doing so, and you can then distribute to the department via requisitions, and the cost would be lower in that sense. Okay, and full costing means that you include everything. Okay, normally when you are in an office, especially income generating department, let's say you have look at a faculty, a particular department, and let's say engineering. They develop, they offer courses, and the faculty member would be the one, delivering the instructional courses. And then when you calculate the salary, that would be the direct cost. But then you have the department chair that some of them don't teach. They are managing all the faculties, and then you have the dean. Those are they are not, the dean doesn't teach, but they manage the school, the college. So those become indirect costs. And that's what the process is, indirect. So you want to calculate the average tuition cost for that particular college. You have the direct cost, which is the faculty member plus the salaries and the material that they use for instructional purposes, and then you add, that will be the direct cost. And then the support cost will be the department chair and also the dean. And those are, when you add them up, you have everything. Well, not everything. You can add also the provost and then the president. And then you have the support cost like the VP for admin. So it gets a bit more and more complicated when you try to explain what the full cost is, okay? So you have very different level of graduations when you make decisions. So full costing is a very important exercise. And then there are other a myriad of other costs that you can develop. Okay? But the most important thing for us is to get back to the tree here, which is an oak tree really, and to end up with a cost allocation plan. Now, there are two backgrounds that we use when we develop the cost allocation plan. One is the Chancellor's Office Executive Order 1000. Executive Order 1000, just to simplify things, means that when the university provides services to auxiliaries or assert support, the university have to recover those costs, okay, in some fashion. And in order to develop those cost allocation plan, the EO was really developed based on the OMB. UG means uniform guidance. We will see that later on. The OMB is called Office of Management and Budget, and that's a federal agency or department, and they develop a uniform guidance for costing. They develop the vocabulary, and they develop the methodology, how to calculate indirect cost. They did it for grants and contracts, but the concepts are universally applied. So the EO 1000, lean on the OMB uniform guidance very much. So once you have this, then you have this auxiliary thing. You have the Chancellor's Office. We are part of the CSU system, so we also have costs that is flow down to the university to Fullerton from the Chancellor's Office. And then we have the University Financials, which is the data warehouse that we use. And then we have the auxiliaries. We have the parking operation, as I said before, housing, and then we have the true auxiliaries, the ASIs, the ASCs, things like that, the philanthropic foundation, and then the self-support, which I mentioned before, the housing and parking operation. So let's look at now what the mission statement is. As I said before, the mission statement you should really read this because it defines what we are here, why we are on campus, what your role is, and it defines the person, the character of the university. That's what Fullerton is different from Long Beach, and Long Beach is different from Northridge, and so on and so forth, because the mission determines a sort of pattern of behavior, and things that we want to achieve. And purposely, the president used active word, Cali State Fullerton transforms life through innovative and quality education, research, and creative activities. Look at, that used to, before it was a passive statement. Now, I like it because now this is an active, very forceful, saying, hey, this is what we want to do, okay? We want to have the spirit of innovation. We want to develop a good quality instruction, not only instruction, but also everything that supports the instructional function. That's what we call it, education here. And when you have a quality education, most likely that the students who are on campus, they absorb that instruction and also the culture associated with that, and they become good professionals in the future, good CEOs or good leaders in politics, things like that. And also we encourage faculty members to do research, and research comes in two flavors. It can be a personal research to enhance. They usually get involved in that. They publish their own paper within their own discipline. And they also have sponsored research. Sponsored research is when it's funded by a federal agency or by the state. So you have, for example, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, the Department of Defense. All those agencies, they seek faculty expertise, and they're willing to provide funds for specific faculty members who wants to pursue research. And that's a very useful because it creates, it refreshes the faculty members, their own discipline, and also they do multidisciplinary research, so they interact with other departments, other colleges, and other universities in the research endeavor. Research is a very critical function in higher education. I came from the University of Southern California, and when I was getting my PhD there, I was involved in research. My kids were funded by the Office of Naval Research. So I got paid, decently by working and learning a lot in research. And then creative activities, everything that we do is creative, really. It doesn't have to be in arts or, in dancing or things like that, filming. Even in engineering, the creativity is important. Look at the Apple computer. Most of their gadget is very creative, and people appreciate that. My iPhone, I love it. I love the shape, the feeling of that. That's a creative activity. Steve Jobs was fantastic in that sense. So that's what the mission is. It creates a sort of, you feel it on campus that what it is, you live really with the mission of the university. As I said before, once you have the mission, you have to deal with the resources, and then you have to use strategic values. Student success is the number one item here because we want our student to succeed. Ideally, we want our student to finish the degree in 4 years. However, given that the mission of the university here on campus is to have more opportunity to students who are not that privileged. So it takes more time for this student to catch up. So usually we have a 5 and 6 year goal. Okay. Unlike, when I was at USC, most of them graduate in 4 years because first, it's very expensive. Second is that most of the kids are affluent, or if they come to USC from less affluent, they get scholarship. I was one of them. I was funded by all my student career were funded by fellowships, and that's the way it is. So I'm very grateful with the missions and the strategic plans of the different universities. My experience was a private university, but it should happen in every campus. Student success should be the primary goal because that's what we are, an academic institution. For sure, faculty and staff, we have to have a good faculty, a good motivated faculty, and the staff that support. All of us have a different role on campus, but if we do what we are expected to do, we are really contributing in the mission of the university, helping directly or indirectly to students and faculty. Okay. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, this is nowadays is a controversial subject in the White House, but we truly believe that diversity, equity is very good for the environment of the university and for the culture of the university. Creative and scholarly activities, well, we all should pursue that. Regardless of your position on campus, you should always strive for becoming better, learning different things, And in reality, I'm a product of that because I became a consultant. When you're a consultant, you go to a new client, you don't know what you're going to do. Sometimes you say, oh my God, what am I? It's very frightful when you start doing consulting work. But if you have a behavior of trying to learn every day a little bit, regardless of what it is, sometimes this AI new. Well, let me learn that. It's never too old, to learn new things. Okay, so I strongly recommend you to pursue in whatever scholarly research you call it scholar, but you can read a book and you learn something. Always, I learned a lot when I read a book. especially one that I don't like. I don't his point of view, but I'm going to read it anyway and see what he says or she says. and you develop, different point of view. Okay, because nothing is perfect in life. You always have to, learn. Shared governance at the university is a typical example. We have unions here, and we make decisions, in a coordinated way. And then civic and university engagement, that's important. We are a public institution, so we are responsible to not only to the city of Fullerton, but to the county, to the state, and also to the USA in total, and to the international community also, because we do have international students too, and we have to create a good environment for them, so when they go back home, they talk about the university, especially about Fullerton, even though, again, the White House is doing everything they can to prevent a lot of students from coming to campus nowadays. And this is last year I used this, and I still believe in this nice picture. It's no longer, I haven't seen that on the website, but I'm putting there. It should be put back because I like it, because you have the mission here and the vision, like a duality thing. And then you have your values, student success, faculty, and so on and so forth. And then your goals. And then inside the goals, you have your objective, how to accomplish them. Okay. And then you have how to accomplish, those goals and objectives. You have to have an organizational structure. So you have the president here, and then surrounded and helped by all the VPs. How many VPs do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 VPs. Okay. And the most important VP, because we are in an academic institution, is the provost. Okay. The second one should be the VP for admin and finance. The VP finance. You have to look at resources. Without resources, you can have the best goal, but no resources. It's very difficult to accomplish something. Okay, and then you have for sure VP for student affairs, to help students have a better life, to become leaders. You need some support there. And then you have human resources, important to, they adults take care of us, the faculty, every personnel on campus. And then you have the university advancement that deal with the external community. Not only that, but with Sacramento and with Washington, D.C. University Council, well, they are there to keep us out of trouble, I guess. And then we have the director of athletics. We want students to participate in activities, physical activities, and that's a very good thing to do. And then what do we have? Senior AVP for institutional effectiveness. That office is in charge of collecting all the information, historical data, and it provides an important function, especially in the budgeting and teacher planning. And below we have all the deans, all the colleges, and reporting directly. And I personally put only expanded, the provost office, just to show that we are an academic institution. Okay, and each dean have that responsibility in delivering the instructional functions and the educational function of the university, supported by all the other VPs. And then for sure we have the dean of library. They don't do instructional per se, but they facilitate the instructional function. That's what is part of. That's what the leader of the library has a title of dean, because it's a very, very critical function in support of all the instructional activities. And then, so this is as a matter of fact, the provost and all the colleges are the direct function of the university. Okay? The other VPs really support the things. And VP admin, oops, I keep doing something here. The VP admin, for example, supporting all the activities. Everybody else really support the instructional activities. So that's what the provost has a command and lead in every academic institution after the president. And then we have the complementary organization, the auxiliaries and the self-support, like housing and parking. And here we have, for example, ASI and things like that. Okay, now then look at money. Okay, that's the most important thing. That's about the financial statement, because we should always understand what the financial statement is for the campus. The most important item here is the revenue section, followed by the expense, and then the other miscellaneous item. Then look at the revenues. We collected in the year that ended in 2023, about $181 million in tuition revenue. Okay. That's a lot of money. And then we received from what I mentioned in sponsor research that our faculty member get. We receive $222,000 through the university funding. However, we receive specific grants or grants awards from the different federal agencies, $21 million. And this is managed by ASC, the Auxiliary Services Organization. They are in charge of managing all the federally funded grants and contracts, also by the state and local government here, and other private institutions. So we have about 28 million, about $30 million that the faculty members receive in terms of sponsor awards. Most of them go to faculty. There are some that is controlled by the student services, things like that. And then also we have sales and services of the educational activities, scholarships, things like that, and $49 million. And this probably is related to housing and parking operations, and $28 million controlled by the auxiliary organizations like ASC and maybe ASI, things like that. And then we have other operating revenues. So the total revenues in 2023 fiscal year that ended in 2023 was about $240 million in revenues. Now then look at the expense. The expense, you look at the grand total, is $701 million. Okay? So look at the disparity. We bring in $240 million, but our expenditure is $700 million. Okay? So the tuition that we charge doesn't support not even 50% of the expenses of the university. And we do so purposely because we are a public institution. So therefore, some money have to come from where? We are on the state agencies, so the state of California will provide additional funding. If we go to the next page, we have that the state appropriation allocated almost $3 million, let's say, to Fullerton, okay? And the federal government, 91, and so on and so forth, for a total income about, you add them up, is 607, and then we have all the grants and gifts. So when you add the total revenues minus the expense, we got a surplus of $151 million in year that ended 2023. Unfortunately, we are forecasting for next year that we're going to be in a deficit due to this item here. The state is not going to give us enough money. And so our position, as far as 2023, we were in the hole by $732 million. But when we add the auxiliary component, we have a surplus here. So the net is about $500 million that we carry for 2004, 5, and so on and so forth. So this is the state of the financial status of the university. Okay, now let's go to the fundamental understanding of cost allocation, and that is the federal cost principles. This cost principle took many, many decades to develop. It was an incipient cost principle. Let me get smooth. And I remember during the Second World War, I was young at that time. Toward the end of the fiscal year, the federal government incentivized faculty members at different universities to pursue research, especially in weapons research and defense. The National Science Foundation was more about science in general, but there was a big chunk of money coming from the Department of Defense through the different agencies. It was starting with the Army, the Air Force, things like that. Contracting faculty to develop new weapons and munitions and things like that. And at that time, every university developed their own costing. They said, well, it cost me so much to do this type of research. Another university cost me this much. And then they looked at, the federal government looked and said, okay, I know that these faculty members, you have your direct salaries. I can understand the salaries, and I can understand the benefits and all the material that you want to do your research. But you're adding another thing here called overhead. What the hell is that? So they looked at every university, they have a different amount of overhead. So I said, wow, how do you calculate that? And there was no principle at that time. So each campus would, add the support costs from payroll, from the VP for finance and admin and so on and so forth. And so there was no uniform way of calculating that support cost. So the government started developing the cost principle. Okay, let's make it uniform across the university so we understand what indirect cost is. So they provided definitions, and it took many decades to really develop these cost principles. As a matter of fact, when I was looking my PhD and I was working in a project for ONR, that's what I got hooked up with the federal cost principles and became my professional life. So I've been living with federal cost principles for more than 30 years now. Anyway, it took many years to develop the cost principles, and now finally in December 26, 2013, oops, there's a typo there. Yeah. Finally, the Office of Management and Budget, who is in charge of developing the regulations here, published something that was acceptable to all federal agencies and to all universities. It's research-intensive universities. And it's a complex document, and I have provided the website here so you can access that. And it's very good to really go through that. It's a very boring, but very useful way of understanding what cost allocation, what different costing is, that help you in your finance, in your personal life too, because when you look at your investment, this principle can help you in your life, in your personal life. So the one that we are going to look at just a little bit, because it's a huge document. We're going to plow through the whole thing, going from the title all the way down to subpart E, cost principle. And here, again, the cost principle is there's a lot of pages, but we're going to touch only 4 items here in terms of the definitions that is ingrained in the federal regulations. And we're going to learn the concept of allocation, central services, cost objective, and final cost objective. Now, in order to understand what allocation is, you have to understand the process. In order to have an allocation, you have to have a service department, a service unit that provides services to recipients here that are more than one, okay? So you have a service department that provides services to many customers here. And then then we have to understand that they don't direct charge, they do an allocation rather than direct charge. Normally, when you go to a store, they specifically charge you for your specific services. But in this case, when you're talking about a university or a big corporation, sometimes it takes a lot of time to do specific, charges. Sometimes it's more efficient to just accumulate the cost here and then you allocate in some fashion. So that's when you have the allocation process. You have a service and you accumulate services and accumulate costs here. You have many recipients here, for sure more than one. And then at the end of the process, maybe every month or every year or every half a year, you allocate that to the recipients or beneficiaries of the thing. So that process is called the allocation process, okay? Now, central services is important because that's where the accumulation is. At the university, we accumulate costs at the central administration, consists of the VP for admin and the provost office and human resource and so on and so forth. We provide services to people who provide indirect function. Who are they? Well, first, your faculty member who deliver instruction. I'm sorry. And then, what other revenue generating functions do we have? Well, we have the auxiliaries, parking operations. They charge fees and they generate income. So they become what we call a cost objective, meaning they do the direct function. You have housing. They provide rooms and meals and room and board, and they charge fees for that. You have the associated student that is funded by student fees. And then we have the Auxiliary Services Corporation that they run the grants and contracts and other, the bookstore and things like that generate function. You have the extended education that provides services to the community, professional services, things like that. And they generate income because they charge for tuition. So those are the unit that receive from the central administration services. So we have to allocate that, things like that. The next item that we call it cost objective. Cost objective, imagine a center of accumulation, okay? And is normally addressed to an activity that perform certain duties. It can be a revenue generating function, or it can be an administrative function. All depends on what level you want to address the analysis. So you have to, that's the reason that you have to know the organizational structure. For example, if you are the president of the university, everything below you become cost objective. I want to know how much I'm spending on the human resources, how much I'm spending in VP for finance and the provost office. So you look at that, each of these VP become your cost objective when you're looking from the president point of view, okay? Now let's bring that down to the provost office. Okay, the provost, under him or under her, you have all these colleges. So when the provost look down, he said, okay, these are my colleges, and I want to know how much they spend. Those analyses become the record. Okay, and then look at from you go down one more level from the provost down to the colleges. Now the dean, when they look at the dean, they look at the dean will say, okay, they said that you are in the College of Business and Economics. You look ahead, you look at your provost and the president. They're flowing costs down to you. They'll become overhead. That's how you call it overhead, you pick up. Okay. And then when you look down, you see all your department chairs. Those become your cost objective. You are managing your college. Okay. So you see how, how thing changes. When you're the president, everything is direct, but when I'm sorry. Spawned. Okay. And then when you are, I lost my train. When you're the dean, you look down, you have the provost and you have the president, and then down will be your direct. Okay, so your cost objective. So you see how it changes, and then when you are the department chair, then you have, as a department chair, you look up, you have the dean, then you have the provost, and you have the president. You have 3 levels now. Of course, that this can be allocated down to the department chair. And the department chair, you have many disciplines. You are, let's say, name in English, let's say, and they are, different discipline in the department. So they become also direct objective. You want to study that thing. Mm-hmm. So you can see, the graduation, like a waterfall, the different steps. And then finally, we get the final cost objective. The final cost objective meaning, okay, whatever happened with, the graduation, what is the one that really generates revenues? And there is many. Is the instructional function, your colleges, and then you have all the auxiliaries. Okay, parking, you can name them really. Parking, housing, associate student, the philanthropic foundation, what else? ASI and extended ed, and there are many other minor functions that we won't go over that for the time being. But that will come your final cost objective. Is when you add the cost allocation, the university, the CIP really looked at the final cost objective. So you have central administration costs, we accumulate all the support costs that we provide to the final cost objective, and then we allocate that. Okay, and some of them are direct charge. So we direct charge for specific functions, and some we do not do that. For example, if you look at the physical plan administration, they provide services, many trades. You have the electricians, you have the plumbers, you have the carpenters, and so on and so forth. Those become direct costs because they are providing services directly to the client, to the department. And the supervisor, those become overhead or indirect costs in that level. Okay, so, but the final billing goes to the client, the one who that the department that receives the cost objective. Okay. Now, we already discussed direct cost. The direct cost is something, that deliver the process. And so you capture all the, you talk an electrician, who went to this department, who went to the other department, in what project. So you start tracking those costs, okay? Normally, physical management plan, they have a job order system. So when a department requests some in renovation for a particular room or set of rooms or a building, they create a job and they identify the type of services that that particular client or department needs. So they do the costing, they deploy the number of manpower, number of electricians, anything that they need in terms of trades. Okay, that's the direct cost. And then the indirect, meaning the supervisory time, things like that. The supervisor doesn't work directly to those projects, but then he or she manages all those projects. So that person and the support that he receives from his or her department become indirect costs. And then you go back to the organization structure, you can allocate costs coming from the president's office. So you can stack up many levels in the indirect costs. That's the complexity. That's what is a very difficult subject to explain what indirect cost is, because it depends on the level of complexity that you want. Okay? Now, the allocable function is very simple. If you have a client that receives benefits, then the cost that you generate is allocable. You deserve a portion of that cost. Okay? It's like a cost of membership, things like that. So, however, sometimes when we develop cost allocation, and because it's done on a macro base, sometimes we allocate costs that departments that do not benefit from the services. And so we have to be very, very careful when we develop the allocation model. Okay? That you allocate only to those departments that receive services or benefits, from the central administration. Sometimes it's difficult to perceive that. For example, you have an auxiliary, and let's say ASC, and you're talking about audits, okay, and financial reports. The annual report have to be certified by an independent CPA company. He said, well, we already pay for that. So why do we get allocation from the central administration about, audit expenses, things like that? He said, we don't use those services. We already pay for this. Am I correct? Isn't that a good question? Already pay for my services. So why do I use allocating me for the service? Well, the reason is that the auxiliaries, even though they are not, very well linked, but they are part of the mission of the university. Parking operation, ASI, ASCs is part of the university. It's reporting the financial system. They are part of the university community. Therefore, there are certain costs that they have to pay. Okay, and all the expenses and budgeting. They said our budget office allocate to everybody, even though they have their own budget. And auxiliary, they have their own budget. They do that. We don't, but we allocate that because they are part of the university. It's like a cost of membership. Okay? It is when you sign up for a club, and they offer golf and they offer tennis, pickleball, whatever you name it, swimming pool. But I don't use the swimming pool. Why should I pay for that? That's called a cost of membership because it's part of the mission of the particular club. So the allocability is sometimes easy to comprehend and sometimes it's difficult to explain. Okay. Okay. Now let's look at more specific things. What is going on with indirect? When indirect is really support costs. Okay? What happened with the support costs in the CSU system? See, the university is part of the chancellor's office. We're just one of the 23 campuses. So the chancellor's office also spend money managing the 23 campuses. Okay? Remember that I said the president going down it's the same thing. You have the chancellor, the president report to the chancellor. Okay? So we get costs allocated from the chancellor's office. And one way that they do is called the system-wide cost allocation plan. We have the the cap here, they have the S cap, okay? Or we have here the university, cap. So you have the S cap and the U cap, okay, in a way. So we receive allocation flowing down from the chancellor's office to the campuses, including Fullerton, and that's one way. And then sometimes some of the costs, the chancellor's office directly pay for the auxiliaries. Those costs once paid, they flow down the cost to the particular auxiliary. And then we have the university cost allocation plan. And then there is a special rate that that the university negotiate with the federal government. It's called the F&A rate. And this is applicable only for sponsor awards. Remember, I said before, many faculty members, they receive grants from the federal government, and then the rate is applied to the expenses of those projects to capture the support costs that we provide. That includes administration for F. F means facilities. That means, they use the laboratories, they use the buildings. So facilities includes building depreciation, interest costs, and things like that, equipment depreciation. And the A means administration, is pay for the budget office, things like that. Okay. Now the F&A rate is managed by the auxiliary, ASC, Auxiliary Services Corporation, and they are in charge of managing the grants. They are the one who collects to bill the government, not the university. They have their own accounting system. And then they collect the indirect cost, which is the F&A rate. And then once they collect that, they provide they retain some of the collection to pay for the admin and ASC, and the rest is deployed back to the university. Okay. So that's the way thing. And the rate calculation is governed by the OMB Uniform Guidance Cost Principles. And they negotiate the rate every 4 years, I think. So this is an example of negotiated rates that is prevailing at this moment. Fullerton, for example, negotiated a rate of 42% for any project that's being conducted on campus. And then if the project is conducted off campus, let's say when you have a project that is done in high seas, about plankton, things like that, then they don't use a university facility, they pay 26%. Based on what? Based on MTDC. Again, MTDC means you take the project, look at all the costs, direct costs, faculty salaries, student salaries, all the expenses, and then you remove certain part of that. They say they bought equipment. The equipment is not part of the MTDC. Capital equipment, not all of it, capitalized equipment. And then the other costs are also removed so that the MTDC is always smaller than the total direct cost. And different campuses have different rates. The most expensive one is San Diego or San Francisco. San Diego because they have very good laboratory. And probably San Diego campus has the most laboratory among all the 23 campuses. The next one is San Francisco, because that is dependent because San Francisco, but everything expensive, more expensive than here. Everything. Rent is very expensive. The rest, we are in the 40s. Fullerton's are now 42. LA is at 46 and North is at 45%. Even San Jose, that has a lot of research, they get only 46%. So they negotiate with the federal government every 4 years on average. And this is the complicated way of calculating the F&A rate. You have a different cost pool. You have building and equipment depreciation. You have the interest costs associated with the financing of buildings and laboratories. You have operation and maintenance, janitorial services, building services, and whatever related to physical plant. And general administration, that includes, the VP for admin and finance, the provost office, things like that. Department administration are all the department chairs. For the federal government, department administration is restricted only for department chairs. And then sponsored project administration are usually this is captured at the ASC, is the people and staff who are in charge of managing those sponsored projects. If the university has a committee, let's say for human subjects, that is part of the sponsor program. If there is another committee for animal welfare, also is part of that. Normally, in the UC, in the CSU system, there is an auxiliary that managing the sponsor project. Even though some campuses now are integrating the research into the university. Okay, there aren't that many, but there are some that is like that. And then you have the library by itself. Is explainable all the services provided to the instructional function and research functions. And student services, probably mainly for the VP, student first, things like that. So all these are calculated and accumulated into what we call cost pools. And there's a special formulation for the allocation. All the space-related costs are building, interest, operation, and maintenance allocated based on space. You look at the you have to take an inventory of the space. You measure each room, calculate the square footage for a particular building, and then for each building we calculate how many of that space, how many square footage is used for instruction, how much for research, and so on. You start categorizing that in terms of different functions. Mm-hmm. And based on that distribution of space, you will allocate this. And then for the other ones, general administration, departmental, sponsor, all these are allocated based on what we call the modified total cost, based on cost rather than space. Okay? So once you allocate that to, and there are 4 instructional functions that the federal government recognizes. One is instructional function. The other one is called organized research, meaning sponsor research. And then any other sponsor activities that is not research, like. And then you have anything that is auxiliary. So you allocate all this and then calculate, divide by the MTDC, you get a rate. You calculate this rate, and then you take this rate and negotiate with the government. Usually they like to do a discount. You calculate, let's say 50%, they give you 45%, something like that. So in terms of the system-wide cost allocation plan, I just want to use this chart, even though it's old, but it gives you what they charge. The category hasn't changed. The amount may have changed, for the current fiscal year, let's say. Fullerton, let's say, receive, for the chancellor's office, general administration receive a big chunk, $6.4 million. And for the management of sponsors awards, $8 million, library, $700, and bond and interest, $2.9 million, for a total allocation of $10 million. And things like that. And then centrally paid activities. I just listed a few as an example. And you see Fullerton, the chancellor's office pay, let's say, for continuing education, $995,000, for housing programs, $771, and so on and so forth. for a total of about $7 million. So this is an example of how things, flow down from different areas. And then, for sure, we have the university cost allocation plan that is compliant with the Executive Order 1000. In summary, the Executive Order says we cover any cost that that are associated with services that we provide to the final cost objective. That means all the auxiliaries. And that's the gist of the Executive Order. And the good thing about the Executive Order 1000 is that each campus, have to do it in terms of their own specific cost structure. It doesn't mandate a universal way of doing it. So the policy objective is that we have to identify costs that are allowable. Allowable means that it is allocable. Allowable means that we have removed all the items that we should not allocate. And the one in charge of all these operations for each campus is the VP for Finance, or the CFO. And specifically here on campus, the resource planning and budget, that's where I'm coming from, is in charge of developing the cost allocation plan. It's a long process. It takes several months to do it, but eventually we have finished and then develop a plan, and each auxiliary gets charged a certain amount for central administration services. Okay. Again, this is the same thing. The direct cost, indirect cost is the same principle. It's also included in the policies of the Chancellor's office. If they find the direct cost, it's exactly the same as what the OMB uniform guidance is. They will change. And so the Executive Order 1000 do have a little more leeway in terms of what basis we need to allocate. Instead of MTDC, we can use, for example, salaries and wages. We can use space. We can use whatever university wants. But at Fullerton, we decided to use just one single allocation plan to make it simpler, understandable, and it's called the MTDC base. And this is a chart that we developed to reflect the chargeback that we do. Chargeback meaning it's a direct function. So some of the services that we provide, we directly charge. If we can identify the service specifically, to a particular department, usually we charge back. And it's, for some examples are the copy center, things like that. You know exactly what. So you just provide the services and you charge back for those services. But the other costs like budget office, we service everybody, okay, including the auxiliaries. We review the budget, we monitor the budget. But in order to charge directly, it would be a very cumbersome problem. We can do that, by each logging on. Okay, today I put 2 hours for parking operation reviewing it. Tomorrow I did so many. And you have to identify each person. That would be a very cumbersome and expensive system to keep track of that. So we do it. That's what we have the cost allocation system. Any question on this?
Is it the same model they use to calculate like capital projects?
Capital project? Well, a capital project is very specific. We don't. It depends what you want. The capital project can include indirect costs or just direct costs. For example, a capital project can be what we did recently with housing. They're building a new building now, phase 5, I think. That's a capital project. So we develop very complex pro forma budget for it, extending 12 years. and that includes all the direct costs and projection for debt service. Not only that, they have, in order for a project to be viable, they have to be able to show that the debt service, meaning the bond that they sold, that the interest and the paying impact of principal, they generate enough income to pay for those additional debt service. So we have to look at those too. Okay, and normally we do not add the overhead, the university cap. We just concentrate in the capital project itself. Okay, and not only that, we have to show that that capital project alone can survive operating by itself. And then we look at the integrated, with the existing building. So we have to provide two assessments. One, the capital itself in terms of financing and income generated. And then we have to provide the overall, business of the part of housing operations. So it's a very complex thing that we've done it many times. I participated probably 3 projects already for housing and 1 for parking, I think.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When facilities charge back to a department and they have project management fees within the chargeback itemization, would that be considered an indirect cost?
Well, we could, it's an indirect cost, yes, and specific to that particular department. So I mentioned before, let's suppose that you have a supervisor that is in charge of 5 trades, the electrician, the plumber, the carpenter, and so on and so forth. And then when your department, it can be any department, it can be your department for the president's office, you request some services and they provide that, then they deploy the trailers and they know who they are, and that becomes direct cost to the specific project. And then they add all the material supply they consume, and that also is billable. And then comes the overhead, the supervisor time that we allocate, and then the executive director time, and so on and so forth. Okay. And then once they do that, we do not put those costs into the cost allocation plan, because if we include that, we are double charging. You pay one directly and then you pay again as an overhead. We don't do that. Well, we try not to do that. And then we also recognize, because of the mission of the university, that auxiliary enterprises, especially ASI and the CSU, the ASC, that they provide services that are sometimes not quantifiable, but provide value to the university. That's the reason that they are here. Why do we have parking here? They can be independent if they want to. They can, you as a citizen, you can put a parking operation just adjacent to campus and charge less. But the reason that we have the parking operation here is to facilitate the mission of the university, to make, for the faculty or the staff not to waste time finding for parking. Okay, so there is a cost to that, and so we recognize that when the parking offers services that is on top of the normal operations. Okay. Let's suppose there is a civic event here, and the parking offer things that are beyond their normal responsibilities, and that's called in-kind services. And there is a value the university recognized for the contribution, and we quantify that and discount what we allocated. If we allocated $100 and they did a $10 in-kind contribution, we just charge $90. Okay, that's the purpose of that. Again, the in-kind has a very integrated link to the mission of the university. Oops. And this is another view, a macro view of the cost allocation plan. Again, we start with the mission and with the strategic plan. the strategic plan have goals and objectives, and that is formalized in terms of budget proposals. Each department, each dean, propose their budget and the operational budget, and then this get integrated into, it's aggregated into level from department to VP. So there's a associate VP, associate to the VP, and then the VP for admin, you have the VP for human resources, the VP for academic affairs, so on and so forth. And the whole thing gets integrated into the university budget. And who is in charge of doing that? Resource planning and budget. Okay. So we are the office who put everything together and make sure that there are no conflicts in terms of the overall budget. Sometimes we find them and we ask them to review them to come back with something, that is subject to approval. Okay, everything goes through the V. Once we put the packages and it's sent to the VP for admin for the final approval, and then it goes to the president. And then the president goes to the chancellor's office. So once this thing is implemented, is approved and set up in the financial system, then the fiscal year start, expenditures start to accumulate, and goes to the data warehouse. We access the data warehouse, and at the end of the fiscal year, a month or one day after closure, and then we start thinking about the EO 1000, the cost allocation plan, develop the cost goals, all those things. And a big chunk of that is allocated to the university direct function, which is instruction. That's how you have a big, thick arrow. Most of them will go to the instructional function, and the remaining ones is allocated to the auxiliary and self-support. Once we allocate to each of the auxiliaries and self-support, and then we do the discount by recognizing the in-kind contribution, and then we issue the final net allocation. So this is what the auxiliaries and self-support end up paying. And finally, we have another view here, and this one, it just showed that the majority of the thing that we allocate come from central administration, and there are 3 ways to recover those costs. One that I mentioned, one is direct charge, copy machine, telecom, all those things, processor are directly charged. And then a portion of that, of the central administrative charge to the instructional function, and the remaining is charged to the auxiliaries and self-support. And the auxiliaries come in 3 flavors. One is called a fiduciary agency that the associated students. It's called fiduciary because it comes from student fees, and they have to report, monitor that very carefully. Auxiliary organization, you have the Auxiliary Service Corporation that manages grants and contracts. You have the Philanthropic Foundation. And then for self-support, you have parking, housing, and the extended education. That is the gist of the cost allocation plan. The reality is more complicated, but that's the gist of what is cost, what I call the cost principles. Any questions? And if you don't have any questions, you have additional. This is the homework for you, is to look at all the reference documentation that you use for this presentation, and you can plow through that and learn a little more. Okay. Remember at the beginning, the mission is for you to learn, explore, and this is one cost allocation is one thing to learn and very useful. At least it has been very useful for me. That's the reason I am a consultant, because this thing is so complex that it provided me a good professional life.
Sounds like it.
So
I'm
I
glad
always,
I'm not in that realm.
no, I always, when I visit campuses, I always encourage my client, when you retire, become a consultant.
Thank you. If you don't have any questions, please complete the survey. It'll be sent to you in email as well. Thank you guys for joining.
Thank you for joining and for attending.